Hello. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I am very excited to be here. Like Mike was saying, 2 years ago he didn't say that, but 2 years ago I had a kid. I decided enough of the many open source and conference stuff. But React Native is so exciting. I think the young community, I think there's many things to share. And so I'm excited to be here. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about integrating React Native into an existing native code base, why we decided to do that at Artsy, and how we did it. Also, usually there's so many cat pictures all the time, so I'm going to offset your brain a bit with like some dogs. There's going to be dogs, many, many dogs. Okay, but first, short about me. Mike already did a short part. I'm Eloy Durán. That's a little joke I do with all the services that don't do character encoding well. If you have an accent in your name, keep using it. So I've been a Ruby developer since 2004. I've been doing Mac development since 2006 with Objective-C, iOS development since 2009. And during that time, I have worked on many alternative language solutions for that same system. One is Ruby Cocoa, which is a bridge, Mac Ruby, which was a LLVM re-implementation of the Ruby language on top of the Objective-C runtime, and then Ruby Motion, which was a continuation of Mac Ruby. That was actually a commercial product. I started CocoaPods, which is it's more like Yarn than NPM, I would say, because it's a dependency manager. We don't host packages. But otherwise, it's the same type of idea. And it's for iOS, Mac, and Apple TV. And then I started React Native on Valentine's Day 2016, because I am a romantic. And I'm an Xcode survivor. So I think it's safe to say that I am adventurous. I like to go off the familiar and safe path, which is why I decided to give React Native a try. About Artsy, Artsy makes all the world's art accessible to anyone with an internet connection. That's the goal, at least. And at Artsy, we are open source by default, meaning we open source stuff, and we may ask, like, is there a reason to not open source this, instead of the inverse. So all our clients, for instance, you can find on GitHub, and all this code that I was talking about, you can find there. Eigen is the native app that we've been doing since 2012. All our project names are code named after, based in science, and all the mobile ones start with an E. Emission is the part where we started adopting React Native views, and that's since April 2016. So why? Well, we realized that we were always chasing web parity, but we were always lagging behind by a lot of time. The web developers were able to get the features out way more faster, iterate them in a nice way because they can deploy all the time, and we couldn't. Right? That doesn't inspire us. And so coming from an open background and being used to work with many different types of stacks, we took some time to look at what could our future look like if we would go off the safe UI kit path. So things that we ran into and that we wanted to improve was, we wanted a simpler mental model, right? After 5 years of MVC, model view controller, 2 years of model view model, the code base was littered with technical debt. You know how it goes, right? You have to at some point ship something. It's easy to make a shortcut here and there. You'll clean it up afterwards. Doesn't really happen. And at some point, it's hard to onboard new people. It's hard to iterate on for existing developers. And you just end up with this al dente spaghetti code, right? So what happens is you have all the code in the same language and in the same runtime. And so you make those shortcuts. We had singletons that get used from views, from models, from controllers, also from different threads. It wasn't too great. What we found is that we lacked constraints to keep us in check. And also, that cat is looking very excited at the prospect of eating dog. As cats do. Cats are dangerous. Don't use cat pics. So we were looking for a new paradigm, a new way to structure our view code and contain the state per view component, and not think about updating views or concurrency in view code, etc., etc. Basically, React, right? Another thing we wanted to approach was networking. Our application is basically a JSON viewer, as we call it. It only works with being connected to the network, and it has to work often under bad network conditions, such as art fairs. They have horrible Wi-Fi. Our networking stack wasn't necessarily that bad, but it was a very typical REST one, meaning that before we could render a view, we had to often make many REST requests, which not ideal. So, as you probably all know, GraphQL solves this problem great for clients like ours. We can just fetch the data that we need, and in ideal circumstances, we only need to make one request. Yeah, okay, well, that's not a tree, but, deal with it. Also, that the glasses are incorrect. Just deal with it. Another important thing is that I'm the lead, and I have a team of people, and I wanted to de-silo people. We have the mobile app, and we also have a portion of the website. And the developers were typically very siloed off from each other. Rather than having them re-implement the same features multiple times, I wanted them to pair up and go through the design process together and implement those features across the platforms. And we reached the point where web developers are now working on the mobile app. And last year, they had no idea that they would be doing that. And they're happy, right? Who wouldn't be? So we want to also improve developer experience. Developers should be happy and productive. And the big differences for us are in compiling and relaunch time. A native application, in our case, took 20 seconds on a fast machine to relaunch. As you know, with React and React Native, it can feel instant, especially when you come from 20-second relaunch time. And we wanted to fix bugs and limitations in our own frameworks that we use, which is hard with UIKit. If you're experienced enough, you can disassemble some parts of the framework and figure out where the bugs are, work around them. But it's not a happy process. That's why we prefer an open source solution like React Native. And also, workflows are hard with a closed system like Xcode. Now we use VS Code that we contribute to, we use TypeScript that we contribute to, et cetera, et cetera. And then, obviously, we want to expand platform support. An Android app has been long overdue, but with the way things were going, with us chasing the web, I wasn't looking forward to the prospect of having to do the same thing on Android. And so I wasn't even really thinking about it, but we want to. A lot of people use Android. And so we knew that with React and React Native, we were already productively doing it across web and iOS. So ideally, what I would want is to hire at least one engineer that has deep experience with the platform, and then join the team, and then, again, use the same principles to de-silo and work across the various platforms, as we have been doing successfully. And one team member we had a recent hackathon at Artsy, and he took the time to run our existing emission code base on Android. And the results are good. This is the iOS version of some views in React Native. And it's the Android version, the same views. There's small details, like the fonts aren't right. There's one little layout issue. It's missing the tab view, because that's a native component that has like a fancy animation. But all in all, it's promising. So now we started laying out the roadmap to finally go to an Android app. So Swift. Especially, obviously, a lot of native developers that we know ask us, why would you go with React Native instead of Swift? We considered it heavily. We thought about how we would re-implement something like React, and Relay is what we use for networking now, in Swift. But we would have to maintain it. Not many people would probably use it. It would be a burden. And we have a lot of experience with Swift. We have one application that is fully done in Swift, which you can also find on GitHub. It's called Eidolon. And I'll talk a little bit more about that experience. But so Swift, yeah, it's amazingly optimized. It's a great language. So obviously, it's a better choice than JavaScript, right? Well, not really in our case, because in our case, the application doesn't do any heavy processing. The application mostly is glue code, layout code. Layout is done natively in the background by Yoga, etc. And if we ever need the performance, we can always write native modules. So I'm not too scared about that. And the developer experience with Swift, it's not right for us. The biggest reason is it added even more time to the compile and launch cycle. Could get up to 30 seconds on a really fast Mac. And we had to maintain Swift whenever a new version was released. We had to use dynamic libraries instead of static libraries, and the dynamic linker would have to code sign check all the frameworks at launch time, and now apps launch way slower. A lot of things. These problems will all go away, given enough time, but we needed a solution now, and React Native, and Relay, they tick all the boxes for us. So yeah, Swift is just a language, right? It doesn't help us achieve any of the goals that we really wanted to achieve. And honestly, we didn't choose React Native because we love JavaScript. It's just a pragmatic choice. And we actually use TypeScript, by the way. So to summarize, simpler mental model, simpler and more efficient networking, de-siloing people, improving developer experience, and expanding platform support. These are the reasons why we chose React Native. And they're working out great for us. Okay, so how did we go about it? The first thing is actual integration. We didn't want to change the workflow of existing native developers that were still working on Eigen. So what we wanted to do was make React Native an implementation detail to the larger application. What we chose to do is we have a separate repository called emission, and then we package that as a CocoaPods dependency that Eigen uses like it uses any other dependency. So the package basically looks like that. We compile the JavaScript bundle, right, the production version, and that is wrapped by a Objective-C API called AR emission. And then we expose a bunch of view controllers. Each view is a React Native view that is exposed with like one normal Objective-C view controller. And then Eigen initializes the bridge once it launches. And then the routing engine that we have is called Switchboard. And it just uses those view controllers like it would any other native view controller. So Eigen has no idea that React Native is even running. So the pros, faster onboarding for both projects. Native developers, we also get open source contributions. They can just onboard onto the project on Eigen or emission that they want to, and they don't have to faff around with npm in Eigen or with many of the native issues that you might run into on emission. We can add a bunch of developer tooling to repositories without adding noise to the other one. So in emission, we have an example app where we do all our development in, which you'll see later on. We have separated CIs with their own test setups. It's way nicer. At first, we tried to do like one CI. It's a lot of hurt. And it's also easier for the web devs to review code without having to wade through a bunch of native code that they don't understand. And the nice side effect is that now we have separated views that we can reuse we're thinking about maybe an app that just shows you art shows in the neighborhood. And now they're all packaged up and ready to go. Downsides, always important to list downsides. So a big one to testers is where do I file issues? Now you have more repositories, right? That's why a lot of people go with mono repos. It's harder to test development changes in context of the larger app. We have more release work to do. There's more infrastructure to do weekly builds because of the release work. Eigen needs to extend view controls that are exported by emission. That's a bunch of overhead. But as long as we have people that can support that, the larger team can just work on products, and they're much more productive. Another thing we had to integrate was with our routing engine, with Switchboard. So emission has a native module that it also calls Switchboard, and it's nothing more than just exposes a native callback that the application that uses emission can hook into. It gets a URL, and then it routes to wherever. So it doesn't start playing. Right. So this is a React Native view. Here we go to a fully native view. Then we go back to a React Native view, another fully native view. Jesus, Eloy. And it even goes on to like a web view. So all these things, they just work. All views, we keep them like in a view controller, and we let the native navigation do its work. The React Native solutions at the time did not support this mixed behavior. Nowadays, there are other solutions. I'm sure they would support it, and we would probably look into them. But the gist is that there are these small little hurdles that you'll run into, and you can easily overcome them for your specific situation. This is just the JavaScript API. Just present this URL that I have. And then the Objective-C API takes that URL, finds a view controller, fetches it from the switchboard, and presents it. So it's very simple, probably 20 lines of code. The bigger one is nested scroll views. So in our designs, we had scrolly components that sometimes have to exist inside larger scrolly components. But we still want the inner ones to be able to paginate, to receive scroll events, right? Like on, what's it called, on end reached. React Native doesn't support this out of the box, which is completely fair. So we decided to use Objective-C's dynamic nature to monkey patch React Native scroll view. So I did pray to the demo gods. So let's see if I can quickly show you that, illustrate that situation a bit better. Oh, where did the window go? Okay, maybe just mirror. There we go. So this is the emission example app. We have a bunch of stuff here that's only related to being a developer, so we can pull in a build for a PR so that we can quickly test it. We have a storybook browser, all those kind of things. And then here we have the various view controllers. So in this case, I'll show you the artist view. And the artist view has one large scrolling component, which is like the outer container. And all of the other views obviously live inside that. But this grid that you see here on its own can also scroll when it's used elsewhere. But we still want to paginate this in. By default, if you would do this in React Native, the inner scroll view doesn't get any events. Let me see if I can illustrate it by adding some color. So this is the outer scroll view. Okay, so everything that's red is the outer scroll view. But then inside of there, we have let's find the other one. Oh, I think I can just tap things. Yeah. Do any of you use still Xcode in tandem with your React Native development? Cool. Is that because you were native developers, or do you just use these type of features? Let's see, works for sale. So here's the other scroll view. Let's do this green. Okay, so the red one is a scroll view, the green one is a scroll view. And as we scroll, the scroll view still pages in new data. And what's even more is at some point we reach the end of the for sale artworks. At some point. And there's another one. This is also a scroll view. So it just keeps going, right? And what we did not want is that we did not want the JavaScript code to have to know about this. We didn't want to have people in JavaScript, in their components, think about being nested inside other scroll views. It should just work transparently. So back to the slide for that. There we go. So what happens is, let's see. So we got the red one, and inside the view hierarchy, there's the green one. The green one, when it mounts, it basically checks the view hierarchy to see, is there another enclosing scroll view? And if so, I'm going to register for scroll events notifications. So that's an Objective-C and a notification. Once it gets those notifications, it takes the event object that you would normally get in JavaScript. It takes the coordinates from that event object, translates them relatively to the enclosing scroll view, and then passes that new event object to your scroll view component. It just gets the event, and it is able to do its work like normally. Works great. For us, I mean, I have an open ticket on the React Native repository for over a year and a half. People love it. There's a lot of hearts. And I don't think anybody really uses it besides us. Another thing that's really important for us is, obviously, we show a lot of images. And we want to optimize that where possible. So one thing that we do is we have a shared cache. Eigen already has an image cache. And we wanted to tap into that. So Emission uses the same APIs. It's called SD Web Image. And at runtime, they will just resolve to the same cache. And they will share images where needed, which works great. And then there's also the case that React Native's image component is generic, right? So it should work with any image, including images with transparency. But our artworks, they don't have any transparency. And you can get way more performance by drawing images into an opaque image context rather than into one that supports transparency once the whole view hierarchy is composited. So that's another thing that we do. It's a bunch of code, if you look it up in the repository. But if you're familiar with Objective-C, with native development, it's nice that we can do this, right? So again, I guess, oh, wait, what? Oh. So I guess that's one of my biggest conclusions. It works well for us in production, but you should expect native work. So it means that you can do anything. So you should expect native work if, like in our case, the design is never going to be compromised and led by technological decisions like us using React Native. So if we have people that are able to solve any limitations that React Native would have, that's fine. There's also cases where people would probably be fine with adjusting design according to limitations of the framework. Then it'll probably be fine for you as well. React Native itself, caveat, I mean, like I said, I am adventurous. But it works well for all the other people that use it at Artsy. And the one thing I would say is that bugs are yours to fix, right? As always, with taking on dependencies, React Native is a pretty large one, especially in a native app. React Native itself, I don't know, if you npm install it, it's like 600 dependencies. So, as always with open source, the onus is on you to fix things. You take on the responsibility. Other people won't do it for you. But if you have the mindset that you will take on that responsibility, that you will fix bugs, that you will fix your own limitations, then I would say React Native is a great way to make everybody more happy, more productive, and allows you to expand into new platforms and nirvana. That's basically it. That's our experience. Oh, yeah. That's where you can find a bunch of links to all the repositories and code and tickets and whatnot.